So we can see back in the distance the Roman Catholic Cathedral. It was up by Oxford Street Maternity Hospital. And not far behind us is your crack. Of course, I mentioned to you that we're going to come and see the Art College and the Liverpool Institute, and the weird connection, the strange connection between the two buildings and the story of John, Paul and George and the birth of the Beatles. So let's go and explore. So in the shadow of the Anglican Cathedral, and just see the very top of it there, we'll see more of it a bit later on this walk. This is the Liverpool College of Art. This is where in September 1957 John Lennon was enrolled as a student. Having left Quarry Bank, his grammar school, with no qualifications, his only chance to go into further education and avoiding going to work was art. So with the support of his headmaster, Mr. Pobjoy, and the art teacher, John gained a place at Liverpool Art College. And that should have been fine, but of course, as we know, John didn't particularly like school. He liked doing his artwork, but he didn't like studying the history. So it was a good idea, but he got bored very, very quickly. And the Art College was, of course, very important to John. This is where he met Stuart Sutcliffe, became his best friend. Of course, where he met Bill Harry, who started Merseybeat, and where he met Cynthia, his first wife. So John, he liked the drawing, he liked the painting, etc., but he didn't like the art history. And so he didn't do very well, unfortunately. But he made lots of good friends here. Now, I mentioned a strange coincidence. Well, this is the one. So John starts here September 1957. In the very next building is the Liverpool Institute. It was here at the Liverpool Institute that Paul McCartney and George Harrison attended their high school. So right next door to the Art College where John Lennon started in September 1957 was Paul McCartney and George Harrison. This was, of course, when John enrolled at the Art College 2 months after meeting Paul McCartney for the first time. So by a strange coincidence, 2 months later, John ends up in the very next building to Paul. So of course, once Paul's introduced George to John, he had all three of them in adjacent buildings. Obviously, high school is a lot more strict than art colleges. So at lunchtime, Paul and George could bring their guitars, come out of there, and go into the art college. And when we made Looking for Lennon, and we were talking to Helen Anderson, one of John's best friends and Cynthia's best friends, Helen would say how they were doing their work at lunchtime and they would be serenaded by John, Paul and George with their guitars, singing songs to them. How good would that have been? Now, of course, then, once they decided they're going to do more with their music, John's met Stuart. He invites Stuart to be the bass player. This is where the four of them played. And they were just known as the college band, Saturday nights for the dances. Of course, no drummer at that point. So we're sort of at the end of 1959, beginning of 1960. Now, one thing that the Beatles realised was, of course, they weren't Beatles yet. They didn't have any money, of course, but they didn't have the money for PA equipment. Now, as Stuart was on the Students' Union Committee, they suggested to Stuart, why don't you say the Students' Union needs some PA equipment for events? Yeah, you can see where the story's going, really, can't you? So Stuart puts that forward. The Students' Union buy the equipment. When they become the Beatles, they borrow the equipment and never take it back. Yeah, great, weren't they? This rebounded on Stuart later when, after he'd given up playing with the Beatles in Hamburg, he wants to come back to the art college and do his teaching certificate. But because he'd been caught up in that mess of getting the money and the stolen equipment, he couldn't do that here. Now, in the 90s, the Liverpool Institute closed. Paul decided he was going to buy his old school. He'd had this dream of creating a performing arts academy, a bit like Fame. And so
Paul McCartney has gone back to where it all began to launch his new Fame Academy. The former Beatle put more than $2 million of his own money into the project to train aspiring performers.
Love, love me do.
So you'd like to spin your own records? Like to perform before an appreciative audience?
It won't be long, yeah.
You'd like to go on the road? Well, now all roads lead to Liverpool in the search for fame and fortune. Today the screams were reserved for Paul McCartney as he returned to his hometown to open his very own fame school. A high-tech extravaganza to launch the Liverpool Institute of Performing Arts, and an emotional moment for a former Beatle who was back where it all began.
One of my great feelings now is how proud my mum and dad would have been if they could have been here. But I won't get into that because I'll start crying.
Blood, sweat and tears will no doubt be shed as 190 students are put through their paces, completing degrees in dance, drama and music. The most popular class is likely to be Paul McCartney's own. He is to teach songwriting.
Keep at it, and even though as Peter said it was a hard day's night, we can work it out.
So this is all in the old grounds of the Liverpool Institute. They made good use of the original building. You still see some elements of that there just in the corner. And then obviously the newer part has been built onto it. Well, the students come from all over the world to study at Paul McCartney's LIPA. Just the opportunity to shake Paul's hand on stage when you got your certificate, that's got to be worth it. But they turned out some really, really good students who've gone on to have professional careers in various parts of the performing arts. So that's just one of the ways that one of the Beatles has made a significant contribution to Liverpool.